People always ask me what the worst day of my career was. They expect me to say a crash, a funeral, a bad call I made on the radio that cost somebody something. It wasn't any of those. It was the day I sat in a chair, with my hands flat on a desk, and watched a 19-year-old girl fall out of the sky in slow motion, and I couldn't do a single thing about it except talk to her. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much. For 31 years I worked air traffic and approach control on military fields, the last 11 of them at a training base out in the high desert. Flat land, big sky, the kind of place where you can see weather coming an hour before it arrives, rolling in like somebody dragging a gray blanket across the world. You want to know what a place like that smells like in the morning? Jet fuel and cold dirt. That's it. That's the whole perfume. You stop noticing it after about a week, and then one day years later you smell something close to it at a gas station, and your stomach drops and you're 19 again yourself. We trained pilots there. Young ones. Kids, really, though God help you if you called them that to their faces. They came in fresh, all of them convinced they were the exception, the one who was born for this, and most of them were good and a few of them were great, and one or two every couple of years made you sit up straight in your chair and think, oh, that one's different. She was one of the different ones. I'm going to call her Ray's because that was close enough to her name and her family deserves their privacy. Cadet Ray's, 19 years old. She'd come up through one of those programs where the smart, poor kids get a shot if they're willing to bleed for it, and she'd bled for it. Top of nearly everything. Quiet in a way that wasn't shy, it was the quiet of somebody who was always doing math in her head. The first time I really talked to her wasn't even on the radio. It was in the chow line. She was standing there with her tray and I was behind her, and the kid serving the eggs dropped a whole tray of them on the floor and everybody groaned, and Ray's just bent down without a word and started helping him pick up the mess. Got egg on her flight suit. Laughed about it. I remember thinking, you can tell a lot about a person by what they do when something small goes wrong and nobody's grabbing them. That was about 3 weeks before the day I'm telling you about. The morning started normal. That's the thing nobody tells you about the days that wreck you. They almost always start completely, stupidly normal. It was a Thursday in early autumn. Cool. The sky was that hard, clean blue you only get in the desert when the summer haze has finally burned off. Perfect flying weather, the kind we wait for. There were maybe 6 aircraft on the schedule that morning, training sorties, basic stuff. Ray's was up for a solo navigation flight. Routine. She'd done the route before with an instructor in the back seat, and now she was doing it alone, which is a big deal for a young pilot. The first time it's really just you and the airplane and a whole lot of empty sky. I came on shift at 600. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. My buddy Decker was finishing the night shift, and he gave me the rundown and there was nothing in it. Light traffic, clear weather. A couple of birds we'd had to scare off the runway earlier, which is its own whole thing out there but not unusual. Easy day, Decker said, pulling his jacket on. Try not to fall asleep. I want to find him sometimes and ask him if he remembers saying that. Easy day. We had no idea. Ray's took off at 7:42. I remember the time exactly because I logged it, and because later I read that log so many times the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like little drawings. I can still hear her voice on the radio that morning. Calm, crisp, a little bit of that careful formality young pilots use when they're new, like they're afraid of sounding unprofessional. She read everything back perfectly. She always did. She climbed out, turned onto her route and headed northeast toward the training area. The sun was on her left. Everything was fine. For about 31 minutes, everything was completely, beautifully fine. Here's what you have to understand about my job, so the rest of this lands the way it actually landed. A controller is not a passenger. We're not just along for the ride, watching. We're talking the whole time, guiding, sequencing, keeping airplanes from running into each other and into the ground. There's a rhythm to it. You hold a dozen things in your head at once: altitudes, headings, fuel states, who's coming, who's going, the weather, the birds, the maintenance trucks crossing the active. It's like juggling, except some of the things you're juggling have human beings inside them. And the deal you make with yourself, the deal that lets you do the job for 31 years without going gray overnight, is this: I can help. No matter what happens, there's something I can say, some vector I can give, some field I can send them to, some help I can call. My hands are on the controls too, just from far away. That's the deal. The day I'm telling you about is the day the deal broke. At 8:13, and I know that time too. I'll know it until I die. Ray's voice came over the frequency, and it was different. Not panicked. I want to be clear about that because it matters. She wasn't screaming. Her training held all of it, every minute of it held, but there was a tightness in it, a flatness. The sound a person makes when they're concentrating so hard that they've stripped all the music out of their own voice. Approach, she said. I've got a problem up here. You learn to hear it. After enough years, you can hear the difference between a kid who's about to ask a dumb question and a kid who's about to need everything you've got. My whole body knew before my brain did. The coffee cup was halfway to my mouth and I just set it down, very carefully, like it was made of glass. Go ahead, I said, easy, slow. You never let them hear your heartbeat. Tell me what you've got. I'm seeing the pause, the kind where you can practically hear someone scanning a panel. I've got multiple cautions. My oil pressure's dropping. And I think. And then the engine quit. She didn't have to tell me. I knew from the change in her voice, from the way it went from I have a problem to I am in a problem, the way the words got shorter. But she told me anyway because that's what she was trained to do, and her training held even then. Engine failure, she said. Approach, I have an engine failure. I've lost the engine. Now, I need to stop here and explain something. Because if you've never been around aircraft, you might not understand exactly how bad those 4 words are, and exactly how much worse the next part is. A single-engine jet that loses its engine is not a glider. People think that. They think, oh, it'll just coast down. It comes down, but it comes down fast, and it comes down with you having very few choices and very little time. You've got a little window where you can try to relight the engine, get it spinning again, get fire back in the box. And you've got, layered underneath all of it, the worst option, the one nobody ever wants to think about. You can leave. You can pull the handle and let the seat throw you out into the sky, and let the airplane go down without you. Ray's had altitude. That was the one good thing. She was high enough that she had a little time, not a lot, a little. And here's the part that turned the whole thing into the worst day of my life, instead of just a bad one. When the engine quit, she lost more than thrust. On that airframe, and I'm being vague on purpose, the family knows the details and that's enough. The engine drives the systems, the hydraulics, the main electrical generation. There are backups, there are batteries, there's a little ram air turbine that's supposed to flop out into the wind and spin and give you just enough to keep flying with. It's a beautiful, clever piece of engineering, that little turbine. It has saved a lot of lives. It didn't deploy. I don't know why. The investigation took 8 months and they came up with a likely cause, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understand the metallurgy of it. What I understood that morning, in real time in my chair, with my coffee going cold, was much simpler and much worse. She was losing power, all of it, not just the engine, the flight controls, the systems that let a pilot turn a falling airplane into a flying one. One by one, the things that make a jet instead of a very expensive rock were going dark. And there was nothing, that I could say into that microphone that would put any of it back. That's the moment the deal broke, right there, 8:14 and some seconds. For the first time in 31 years, a pilot was talking to me, and I was talking back, and I had nothing in my hands. No vector that would help. No field close enough. No magic word. The whole base, and by now half the tower knew, you could feel it, that specific silence that falls over a control room when everyone stopped breathing at once. The whole base could do exactly one thing. We could watch. We could watch her on the scope, a little symbol with a number next to it, and that number was the altitude, and the number was going down. I keyed the mic. I had to clear my throat first. I'm not ashamed of that anymore, though I was for years. Raised, I said, I'm right here with you. I'm not going anywhere. Talk to me. She talked to me. God, she talked to me. 19 years old, falling out of the sky with a dead engine and dying systems, and that kid ran the checklist. Out loud. So I could hear her doing it. So that if it went wrong, somebody would know she did everything right. Trying the relight, she said. Throttle, I'm getting nothing, no light off. Okay, I said, that's okay, you've got time, try it again. Trying again, a pause that lasted about 4 years. Nothing. The number by her symbol kept ticking down. I could see her track curving. She was doing it. She was turning back toward the field, toward us, toward the long runway, trying to trade what she had for a shot at putting it down on concrete. Smart. Exactly right. With no engine and failing controls, she was flying a brick and trying to aim the brick at home. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, all these years later. The thing I tell the young controllers when they come up through training, and they think the job is about being calm and clever. It's not about being clever. There are days the cleverness runs out. There are days the deal breaks and your hands are empty. On those days the job is just this. You stay on the radio. You don't let them be alone up there. So I stayed. I want to tell you what a control room sounds like when something has gone wrong. You'd think it gets loud. It doesn't. It gets quiet in a way that's almost worse. The chatter stops. The little jokes stop. Somebody's chair off to my left stopped squeaking, and I realized later it was because the guy in it had stood up and was just standing there with his headset half off, frozen, staring at my scope from across the room. The supervisor came over. I didn't see him come, I just felt him, that presence behind your shoulder, a hand resting lightly near the back of your chair, not touching you, just there. His name was Marsh. Good man. He didn't say anything stupid. He didn't grab the mic. He just leaned down and said, very low, what do you need? And I almost laughed, because what I needed was a working engine 40 miles northeast of me, and there wasn't a single thing on earth Marsh could do about that. Roll the trucks, I said, everything, and get me the field. He was already moving. Behind me, the whole machinery of an emergency started turning over, the crash phone, the fire crews, the medical team, the whole grim apparatus a base keeps oiled and ready and prays it never has to use. I heard the words engine failure and single soul on board, repeated down a phone line in somebody's flat professional voice. And the single soul on board part landed on me funny, because the single soul on board had helped a kid pick up dropped eggs 3 weeks ago and gotten yolk on her flight suit and laughed about it. Raise, I said, how are you doing up there? Talk to me about your controls. There she started and stopped, and I heard her breathing fast and controlled, in and out through the nose the way they teach you. They're getting heavy, real heavy, sticks getting stiff. I think I'm losing the hydraulics. There it was, the thing I'd been dreading since the turbine didn't deploy. I need you to picture it. You're 19. You're sitting in a seat going a few hundred miles an hour through clean blue air, and the airplane around you is dying piece by piece, like a body shutting down, and the stick in your hand that used to move with a fingertip now takes both arms, and every minute it takes a little more, and you know you can do the math. And she could always do the math. You know that there's a point coming where it won't move at all anymore. Where the controls lock up solid and the airplane just does whatever the air wants it to do. And what the air wants is to bring it down. She knew all of that. I could hear that she knew it. And she kept reading me her instruments anyway. Altitude, airspeed, what the stick was doing. Calm, 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 with that little tremor underneath it that she would not let win. You're doing everything right, I told her. You hear me? Everything. I've got the field rolling for you. Just keep her pointed at home. Pointed at home, she repeated, like she needed to hear it back in her own voice to believe it. Now I have to tell you about the call, the one nobody wanted to make. There comes a moment in a thing like this where the math turns, where the question stops being can she save the airplane and becomes can she save herself. And those are two completely different questions with two completely different answers. And the cruelest part of my whole job that day was that I could see the moment the answers split apart, on my scope, in those little ticking numbers, before she could feel it in her hands. She was too low. She traded her altitude turning back toward us. It was the right call. It's the call I'd have wanted her to make, the call any of us would have made, but the airplane was sicker than the textbook ever planned for, coming down faster than a clean dead stick should, and somewhere in the back of my head, a cold, quiet voice that I hate to this day did the geometry and said, "She's not going to reach the runway, and she's running out of room to leave." The seat, the ejection seat, that was the whole ballgame now. There's a window for it, a band of altitude and a band of airspeed and a band of attitude where the seat works the way it's supposed to, where it throws you up and out and the chute has time to open and you live. Get outside that window too low, too fast, too steep, upside down, and the seat that's supposed to save your life can take it instead. She was burning through the top of the good window, and the controls were stiffening up, which meant the longer she fought to fly it, the worse her odds got of being able to put it in the right attitude to leave it. I had maybe 10 seconds to decide how to say the most important sentence of my entire career. Here's the thing they don't teach you. They teach you the procedures. They teach you the phraseology, the exact words, the readbacks. They do not teach you how to tell a 19-year-old to stop trying to save the thing she's been dreaming about her whole life and jump out of it instead. There's no card for that. There's no checklist. I keyed the mic. My mouth was dry as the runway. Raise, steady. I made it steady if it killed me. Listen to me very carefully. You are not going to make the field. Silence, just her breathing. I know, I said, and I'm not ashamed that my voice did something on those two words. I know, kid. You did it right. You did everything right, but she's not going to make it and you're running out of altitude. I need you to get ready to leave the airplane. The breathing changed, faster. I can make it, she said. I think I can stretch it, I can. You can't, gentle, firm, the hardest two words. You can't, and I'm not going to lie to you, not now. The runway's gone, but you're not. Do you hear me? You are not gone. There is still a good answer here, and it's the seat. Set yourself up for the seat. I've replayed that exchange more times than I can count. In the shower, in the car, at 3 in the morning for years. And every time the thing that catches in my throat is the pause that came next. Because she didn't argue again. She'd asked once. She'd hoped once. And then this kid, this 19-year-old kid with a dying airplane and stiffening controls and the ground coming up, took whatever was rising in her chest and she swallowed it whole, and her voice came back, and it was steady, steadier than mine. Copy, she said, setting up for ejection. And then, I will hear this until they put me in the ground, she said. Tell my mom I wasn't scared. The whole room heard it. The frequency was on the speaker. Marsh, behind me, made a sound like he'd been hit. And I had about 4 seconds to answer her, and what I wanted to do was tell her the truth, which was that being scared was fine. That there was nothing on God's earth more reasonable than being scared right now. That brave people are scared and do the thing anyway, and that's the whole entire definition of brave. But she didn't need a philosophy lecture in the last seconds. She needed her controller to be solid. So what I said was, you tell her yourself, after, now wings level, get your attitude right, and when you're ready you go. You don't wait for me. You go, posture up, head back. You go when it's right. Copy, she said. Raised, I said. Go ahead. I don't know why I said the next part. It wasn't procedure. There's no card for it. I've got you, I said. Whole base has got you, you're not up there alone. A tiny pause. Thank you, she said. And then the frequency went quiet. The specific quiet of a pilot who stopped talking because both her hands and her whole mind are now busy doing the single most important thing she will ever do. I watched the number. I want to tell you I watched the sky, but I couldn't see the sky from in there. She was 40 miles out, just a symbol and a number on a scope. So I watched the number, that little altitude readout, the most important number in the world ticking down, while the entire base held its breath, and the fire trucks raced down a road toward a patch of empty desert, and a girl I'd shared a chow line with 3 weeks ago got ready to throw herself out of a falling airplane. The number kept dropping. And then her track did something on the scope, a little jink, a change. And I leaned forward so far I nearly put my face on the glass, because I knew what that jink might mean, and I didn't dare hope, and I keyed the mic with a hand that wasn't steady anymore at all, and I said the only thing left to say. Raze, talk to me. Are you out? Raze, are you out of the airplane? Nothing came back. Nothing came back. You have to understand what that silence does to a person. There are different kinds of quiet on a radio. There's the quiet of a pilot who's busy. There's the quiet of a frequency that's just empty for a second. And then there's the quiet that opens up under you like a trapdoor. The quiet that could mean she's floating down under a good chute too busy and too shaken to talk. Or could mean something I wasn't going to let myself think. I kept my voice level. I don't know how. 31 years of practice, maybe, the body doing what the body's been trained to do while the mind is somewhere else entirely. Raze, this is approach. If you read me, key your mic. Just key it. You don't have to say anything. Static. Raze. Behind me, Marsh had the crash phone in his hand and he was reading off a position, the last good point on the scope before the symbol dropped below where our radar could see it. That's the thing about low altitude far out. You lose them. The earth gets in the way. She'd gone down into a fold of ground where my electronic eyes couldn't follow, and the last I had of her was a faint track and a falling number and then nothing. Just a patch of empty desert on a map and a feeling in my chest like somebody had reached in and grabbed a fistful of me. The fire trucks were rolling. The helicopter, we had a rescue bird, a good crew, was spinning up. But all of that takes minutes, and minutes are an eternity, and there was a window of time, maybe 8 or 9 minutes, where there was nothing left to do but sit in my chair with my dead microphone and not know. I've done some hard things in my life. That was the hardest, the not knowing, the sitting still. The rescue crew chief that day was a guy everybody called Pop. He was probably 50, which out there made him ancient, with a gray mustache and forearms like fence posts and the calmest voice you ever heard. He'd pulled people out of wrecks all over the world. He'd seen everything. And I want to tell you about what happened on his end because I got it from him later, more than once, sitting on a tailgate with a couple of beers we weren't technically supposed to have, and it's part of the story now. Pop's helicopter went up and turned northeast and chased the coordinates Marsh had read off. The desert out there is not the smooth, empty thing people imagine. It's broken. Washes and ridges and dry creek beds, scrub and rock, the kind of ground that looks like nothing from the highway and turns out to be a maze when you're low over it looking for a person. They had 2 things to look for. The wreck, that part's easy. A crash jet makes a mark on the world you can see from a long way off, a black smudge and sometimes a column of smoke. And the chute. White if it opened. A white canopy against brown dirt, the most beautiful thing a rescue crew can see. Pop said the first thing they found was the smoke. It was off to the left of where they expected, down in a wash, and it was the wreck, and it was bad, burning, scattered, the way a high-speed impact scatters a thing. And Pop, who'd seen everything, said his heart went right down into his boots, because if she was still in that, there was no point in hurrying. But you hurry anyway. You always hurry anyway, just in case, because the one time you don't is the time you'll never forgive yourself for. So they came around, and they were lining up to put down near the wreck. And the kid in the door, the young loadmaster, barely older than Ray's herself, grabbed Pop's shoulder and pointed. Not at the wreck. Up the wash, maybe 400 yards, on a little rise. White. I was still in my chair, still on my dead frequency, and the speaker in the control room was now patched to the rescue net, so we heard it the second they did, Pop's voice, that ancient calm voice, and it cracked right down the middle on the most beautiful sentence I have ever heard a human being say. We've got to shoot. We've got to shoot on the ground and stand by. We've got movement. We've got movement at the chute. Movement. The whole control room came apart. Not cheering. It wasn't that yet. Nobody was ready to cheer. We'd all been holding our breath too long to trust it. It was a sound more like a sob that a dozen grown adults make at once, a kind of broken exhale, hands over mouths, somebody's chair finally squeaking again because the guy in it sat down hard. Marsh put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it, and I put my hand over his without even thinking, and the two of us, two old men who'd known each other 20 years, just held on to each other for a second like we were on a sinking boat. She was out, she'd gotten out, the seat had worked, the chute had opened, and she was moving. But I want to be honest with you because I promised you honest. Moving isn't the same as okay. People survive ejections and they are not okay. That seat saves your life by doing something violent to your body. It's a controlled explosion that throws you out of an airplane. People walk away and people don't, and people walk away and spend the next year in surgery. So we heard movement and we didn't cheer. We just started breathing again and we waited. Pop put the helicopter down. He told me later it was the worst landing he ever made, rough as a cob, because he wasn't watching his instruments. He was watching that white canopy and the small dark shape moving next to it, and he didn't care if he bent the aircraft. He just wanted to be on the ground and out the door. He was first out, ran up the rise with the medical kit, and what he found. He told this part slow, every time. He'd get to this part and he'd take a long pull on his beer and look off at the mountains. What he found was a 19-year-old girl on her knees in the dirt, still half tangled in her parachute lines, helmet still on, visor up. One arm was clearly broken. She was holding it against her body, the way you hold something that hurts in a way you can't fix. Her face was white as paper. And she was trying to get the radio on her survival vest working, to call in, to do the procedure, even now, even on her knees in the desert with a busted arm and her airplane burning 400 yards away. Pop got to her and dropped down in front of her and said, "Hey, kid, we got you. You can stop now." And she looked up at him, and Pop said her eyes focused on him slow, like she was coming back from somewhere very far away. And the first thing out of her mouth, the very first thing before it hurts, before what happened, before any of it. She said, "Did I do it right?" I think about that a lot. A kid who just survived the worst 9 minutes a person can survive, who done a textbook ejection out of a dying jet, who was kneeling there broken in the dirt, and the thing she needed to know, the thing that was burning in her ahead of her own pain, was whether she'd done it right. Whether she'd been good enough, whether the people who'd trained her and trusted her would be proud. Pop, 50 years old, hard as a fence post, said he had to look away for a second to get himself together before he could answer her. Then he looked her dead in the eye and said, "You did it perfect. You hear me? Perfect. Now hold still and let me look at that arm." They got her on the helicopter. Pop got the broken arm splinted, got a line in her, got her stable. She kept fatting in and out, shock mostly, the body finally allowed to fall apart now that the crisis was over and somebody else was in charge. And at some point, halfway back to the field, she came up out of the fog and grabbed Pop's sleeve with her good hand and said, "There was a voice. On the radio. He stayed with me the whole way. Is he, can you tell him?" And Pop keyed his mic, on the rescue net, on the net that was patched to my control room, and he said, "Approach, this is rescue. Your girl's asking for you. She wants you to know she heard you. The whole way down, she heard you." I'm not going to pretend. I held it together when that came over the speaker. 31 years. I'd kept my voice steady through engine failures and gear-up landings, and one midair I still don't talk about. And I sat there in that chair with a whole room full of people I worked with every day, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a boy. Marsh just stood there with his hand on my shoulder and let me. After a minute, I wiped my face with the heel of my hand, the way you do, and I keyed the mic. And I made my voice work one more time, because there was something I needed her to hear, even though they told me she probably couldn't, even though it was against every protocol and I didn't care. Rescue approach, I said. Tell her, and my voice went and I waited and I got it back. Tell her I never had a doubt. Tell her she flew it like a pro and she left it like a pro, and there is not one thing I would have done different. And tell her. I stopped. Tell her welcome home. They flew her straight to the hospital in town, the big one, the one with the trauma unit. I didn't see her that day. I wanted to. I think every person in that control room wanted to drive straight over and stand in the doorway of her room just to see her breathing with our own eyes. But I had a shift to finish, and there were still airplanes in the sky, and the brutal small truth of my job is that the world doesn't stop because one of yours nearly died. Somebody's got to keep talking the rest of them down safe. So I finished my shift. I don't remember much of it. I remember my hands shaking on and off for the next 2 hours, little tremors that came out of nowhere, the body cashing checks the mind had written during the emergency. I remember somebody put a fresh coffee by my elbow and I never drank it. I remember the sky going from that hard clean blue to gold to gray, the long desert evening coming on, and I remember thinking over and over, she's alive, she's alive, she's alive. Like if I stopped saying it inside my head, it might stop being true. When my relief came on, I gave him the rundown, and my voice was fine, totally professional. And then I walked out to my truck and sat in the parking lot in the dark and didn't start it for 20 minutes. I saw her 3 days later. By then the story was everywhere on base, the way these things go. The kid who dead-sticked a dying jet, who ran her checklist out loud the whole way down, who said, "Tell my mom I wasn't scared." That line got around. It got around fast because it's the kind of line that gets into people. Big, tough crew chiefs were repeating it with wet eyes. The young cadets, her own class, were walking around looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight, because they'd all just had the same realization at the same time. That could have been me, and I don't know if I'd have been that good. I went to the hospital after my shift. I almost didn't go in. I stood in the hallway outside her room feeling like an idiot, this gray-haired controller who'd never even properly met her, holding a paper bag with, I'm embarrassed to say it, a stack of the worst vending machine candy you ever saw, because I didn't know what you bring a teenager who survived the unsurvivable and the gift shop was closed. Her mother was there. I knew it was her mother the second I saw her, because she had Ray's exact eyes, that same quiet doing math behind them look. She was sitting by the bed holding her daughter's good hand, and when I sort of hovered in the doorway, she looked up at me and I started to introduce myself, and I didn't even get my name out. Because Ray's propped up in the bed, arm in a cast and a sling, face bruised, looking about 12 years old without her flight suit on, Ray's heard my voice. And her whole face changed. "That's him," she said to her mother. "Mom, that's him, that's the voice." Her mother stood up, and before I could say anything, before I could do the polite thing and offer a handshake, this woman crossed the room and put both her arms around me and held on, hard, the way you hold something you almost lost, and she said into my shoulder, very quietly, in a voice that was working hard to stay level and not quite making it, "You stayed with my baby." I didn't have any words. I'm telling you, 31 years of always having the right thing to say into a microphone, and standing in that hospital room I had absolutely nothing. I just held onto her mother and we both sort of fell apart for a second, two strangers, and over her shoulder I could see Ray's watching us with the most complicated expression I've ever seen on a human face. Happy and sad and shattered and grateful and 19. So 19, all at once. When her mother let go and stepped back and wiped her eyes and laughed at herself for crying, I finally got to actually look at the kid. "Hey," I said, "brilliant, real wordsmith." "Hey," she said back, and then, because she couldn't help it, because it was just who she was, is the airplane. "Gone," I said, "totally gone. Don't you spend 1 second on that airplane. That airplane did its job, which was to come apart instead of you. You hear me?" She nodded, but I could see it sitting on her, the airplane, the loss of it, the almost made it of it. I'd seen that look on pilots before, and I knew it doesn't go away on its own. "You want to know the truth," I said, and I sat down in the chair her mother pulled over for me. "You did something out there that most people with 20 years on you couldn't have done. You kept your head. You ran your procedures. And when I told you the hardest thing I've ever had to tell anybody, that you weren't going to make the field, you didn't argue with me twice. You argued once, which is human, and then you trusted me and you did the thing. That trust is the only reason you're sitting in that bed, instead of—" I stopped. Her mother was right there. "Instead of somewhere else," I finished. Ray's was quiet for a second. "I wanted to make the runway," she said, "small. I really thought I could stretch it." "I know you did. I keep going over it. What if I'd turned back sooner? What if I'd—" "Hey," I leaned forward. "Look at me. There is going to be a whole team of very smart, very serious people who spend the next several months going over every single second of that flight. That's their job and they're good at it. And I will tell you right now what they're going to find, because I watched the whole thing on my scope. They're going to find that you flew a sick airplane the way it should be flown, and when it couldn't be saved, you saved yourself. And the only thing that went wrong out there was something that went wrong inside the airplane that no pilot on this earth could have fixed from the cockpit. That's not on you. That is never going to be on you." She didn't believe me. Not all the way. You don't at 19, 3 days after. But I saw her file it somewhere to take out and look at later, and that was enough. I left the candy. She thought it was hilarious. Her mother walked me out to the elevator, and we stood there a minute in that fluorescent hospital hallway, and she told me a little about her daughter. How she'd wanted to fly since she was a tiny girl. How they didn't have much, growing up, and how Ray's had clawed her way into the program on pure want. How her father had passed when she was 14, and how he'd have given anything to see her in that flight suit. "She called me from the hospital," her mother said. "First thing, before they even set the arm, and you know what she said?" I shook my head. "She said, 'Mom, I wasn't scared.'" Her mother's chin trembled. "And I said, 'Baby, you're allowed to have been scared.' And she said," her mother laughed, a wet broken laugh, she said, "No, Mom, you don't understand. There was a man on the radio and he wouldn't leave, and as long as he was there I wasn't scared. The elevator came. I didn't get on it, we just stood there." "Thank you," she said again. "I'll never be able to." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Honest to God. I sat in a chair and I talked. She's the one who flew it. She's the one who jumped. All I did was—" I stopped, because I was about to say all I did was stay, and I heard in that moment, in that hospital hallway, the exact thing I'd say to the young controllers for the rest of my career. That staying is the job. On the good days you've got vectors and fields and 100 clever tools. And on the worst day of your life, the day the deal breaks and your hands come up empty, you've got one tool left, and it's the oldest one, and it turns out it's the most important one of all. You don't let them be alone up there. The investigation took 8 months. I told you that already. I'm not going to pretend I followed all of it, but I followed enough, and the broad shape of it matters, so here's what they found. It started small. It almost always starts small. A single part deep in the engine, smaller than your fist, had a flaw in it. Not a flaw anybody did wrong, not a lazy mechanic or a cut corner. A flaw in the metal itself. The kind of thing that's invisible from the outside and grows slowly over hundreds of hours of heat and vibration and stress. A tiny crack getting tinier than tinier, bigger every flight, until one Thursday morning over the high desert it finally let go. And when it let go, it took the engine with it. And when the engine went, the systems that hung off the engine went too. And the little ram air turbine, the clever lifesaver that was supposed to flop out into the wind and keep her flying, it tried. The investigation found that it tried. But debris from the failure had jammed the door it was supposed to come out of, and it couldn't deploy. And that was the thing, that one jammed door, that turned a survivable emergency into the 9 minutes I watched on my scope. One cracked part, one jammed door. That was the whole difference between a routine Tuesday and the worst day of my life. They grounded the whole fleet for a while. They inspected every one of those engines. They found a couple more parts that were on their way to failing, and they pulled them before they could. Which means, and I think about this too, that somewhere out there are pilots flying around perfectly fine today who never knew how close they came, because a 19-year-old girl fell out of the sky and we figured out why. That's the thing about her flight. It didn't just end with her surviving. It saved people she'll never meet. Here's a thing nobody tells you about surviving something terrible. The hard part isn't the terrible thing. The hard part is everything that comes after. The terrible thing has its own momentum. Adrenaline carries you. Training carries you. There's no time to fall apart because there's a checklist to run and a seat to set up and a chute to control. But after the casts come off and the bruises fade and the story stops being the thing everyone's talking about, that's when it gets hard. That's when a kid sits alone in a room at 2 in the morning and the airplane comes back to her, the stiffening stick, the ground coming up, the 4 seconds where she said goodbye to her mother into a microphone. That's the part there's no training for. Ray's had a rough stretch. I'd be lying if I said she didn't. The arm healed clean, she was lucky there, as lucky as you can be in an ejection, but the rest of it took longer, the stuff you can't see on an X-ray. There were months where the question wasn't would she fly again, it was did she even want to, and those are different questions and the second one is harder. I checked on her. Not every day, I didn't want to be the strange old controller hovering over her, but a note here and there, a short message, thinking of you, no pressure. Whenever you're ready, there's coffee. And every so often she'd write back, a line or two, and I could read in those lines whether it was a good week or a bad one, the way you learn to read a pilot's voice on a frequency. For a while there were a lot of bad weeks. And then slowly, there started to be good ones. She told me later what turned it. It wasn't a big dramatic thing. It almost never is. She was at a low point, she said, one of the lowest, and her mother, who is clearly the toughest person in this entire story, sat her down at the kitchen table and didn't give her a pep talk. Didn't tell her she was brave or special or any of it. Her mother just looked at her and said, "You know what your problem is. You think the airplane beat you." And Ray said, "Yeah, kind of, the airplane beat me." And her mother said, "The airplane is in a million pieces in the desert, and you're sitting here drinking my coffee. Who beat who?" Ray said she laughed, first real laugh in weeks, and something shifted. The airplane didn't beat her. The airplane died and she didn't. That's not the same as losing. That's the opposite of losing. That's the most thorough kind of winning there is. She went back to flying. I want you to sit with how big that is for a second. A kid does a textbook ejection out of a dying jet, breaks her arm, spends months putting her own head back together, and then she walks back out to the flight line and gets in another airplane. Not because she had to. She could have done 100 other things with that brain of hers, things with a much lower chance of the ground coming up to meet you. She went back because she wanted to. Because the wanting that got her there in the first place, the wanting her mother told me about in that hospital hallway, that little girl wanting to fly, it survived the crash too. The first time she flew solo again, I made sure I was the one working the position. I didn't tell her. I just made sure I had the shift. And when she came up on my frequency for her departure clearance, her voice as crisp and careful and formal as the very first day, I gave it to her completely straight, completely professional, like she was any other pilot on any other day. Because that's what she needed. She didn't need me to make it a thing. She needed to know that the sky was still just the sky, and the job was still just the job, and that she belonged up there exactly as much as she ever had. She read it back perfect, she always did. And then after the readback, off the formal script, just for a second, she keyed the mic one more time and said, "Good to hear your voice." And I said, "Good to hear yours, kid. Have a nice flight." And she did. She had a nice flight. A completely boring, uneventful, beautiful, nice flight, and she came home and put it on the ground soft as anything, and I logged her in, and I sat there for a minute after my shift just feeling something I don't have a good word for. Full, maybe. Quiet and full. That was years ago now. I retired not long after. 31 years is enough, more than enough, and that day in the desert had taken something out of me that I knew wasn't coming back, some reserve I'd been spending down my whole career. I sat in that chair for the last time on an ordinary afternoon, gave my relief the rundown, walked out to my truck, and that was that. No ceremony I cared about. Just an old man and an empty parking lot and a big desert sky going gold. But I want to tell you about one more day. The last one I'll tell you about, because it's the one I'd pick if I could only keep one. It was at my retirement thing, a small one at the base, just the people I'd worked with. And I was standing there with a paper plate of cake I didn't want, doing the rounds, shaking hands, when the room kind of went quiet near the door. And I turned around. And there was Ray's. Except she wasn't a cadet anymore. She was in a flight suit with real patches on it, the patches of a real squadron, standing straight, older, not a kid anymore, a pilot, a full-grown pilot with that calm, steady thing in her eyes that you can't fake and you can't teach, the thing that only comes from having been somewhere terrible and come back. She'd driven a long way to be there. She hadn't told me she was coming. She walked across that quiet room, and the whole crowd parted for her without anybody saying why, and she stopped in front of me, and for a second neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I never got to do this in person." And she reached out and took my hand, both of hers around my one, the way her mother had hugged me in that hospital hallway all those years before, and she held on, and she looked me dead in the eye and she said, "You stayed with me, when you couldn't do anything else. You stayed. I have flown 100 flights since then, and I have never once been up there alone, because I know that even when everything's gone, the engine, the controls, all of it, there's always somebody who will stay on the radio. You taught me that, without ever saying it. You just did it." I couldn't talk. Old man, retirement cake, whole room watching, and I couldn't get a single word out. So she said the rest for me. "You always told me I wasn't alone up there," she said. "I just wanted to come tell you in person, neither were you." People still ask me about the worst day of my career. The day I sat in a chair and watched a 19-year-old fall out of the sky with nothing in my hands but a microphone and my own voice. And I've stopped correcting them, but I'll correct it for you here at the end because you stayed this long. It wasn't the worst day. For one terrible stretch in the middle of it, sure, those 9 minutes, that silence, that not knowing, for that stretch it was the worst thing I've ever lived through. But that's not where the day ended. The day ended with a white canopy on a rise in the desert and a girl on her knees asking if she did it right. It ended with her mother's arms around my neck. It ended, years later, with a grown woman in a flight suit crossing a quiet room to tell me I was never alone either. So no, not the worst day. It was the day I found out exactly what I was for. A pilot once told me, when I was young and cocky and thought the job was about being clever, that anybody can be useful when they've got tools in their hands. The real test, he said, is what you've got left to offer when the tools are gone. I didn't understand him for 30 years. Then a 19-year-old girl lost her engine over the high desert, and her controls, and her power, every bit of it, until there was nothing left in that cockpit and nothing left in my hands either. And I found out that the last thing left, when everything else is gone, is the one thing that mattered most all along. You stay. You don't let them be alone up there. That's all I ever really had to give. And it turned out to be enough.